Oscar and Sally Schneider. Now, Phil's father, Oscar, was a captain in the U.S. Navy, and he worked in nuclear medicine, and he helped design the first nuclear submarine. Phil's father was also known to test these nuclear weapons as well. And Phil would later say that his father also worked for NATO and that he was involved in a ton of top secret projects. Now, we could go real deep into Phil Schneider's father and the top secret projects that he worked on, like the Philadelphia Project, but we're going to keep on moving here. Because Phil's father was in the Navy, growing up, Phil moved all around, but he lived a pretty normal life, and his school records showed that he had a very high IQ that was above 160. Then, in 1986, Phil met his wife, Cynthia Dreyer, in Portland, Oregon, at a meeting of the Oregon Mineral Society. Cynthia said that she was drawn to Phil because he had so many interesting stories and so much information to share. Phil and Cynthia got married soon after meeting, and they had a daughter together named Marie in 1987. However, by 1990, they ended up getting a divorce, and Cynthia would later go on to say that Phil's health problems were the reason why the two split. Phil had several health issues. He had chronic lower back pain, and he also had multiple sclerosis. Because of this, Phil sometimes had to use crutches, a body brace, leg braces, and a catheter and a wheelchair. And he also had cancer in his arms, and he had many wounds, and he had a metal plate in his head, and he had missing fingers on the left hand. And the biggest scar, and the one that we talked about in the other video that I did, is a scar that Phil had that ran from the top of his throat all the way down below his belly button, and he had another scar under his ribs. Now, these injuries were allegedly from an attack at an underground military base in Dulce, New Mexico in 1979 by aliens that Phil called the Large Grays. So let's talk about the Dulce base. Now, Phil claimed that there were over 100 deep underground military bases, or they're also known as DUMBs, deep underground military bases, that the public is completely unaware of, and I would have to assume there's a heck of a lot more than 100 by now. Nevertheless, he claimed that the government had been hiding these underground bases since the early 1940s, and maybe even earlier. Phil would say that back in 1954, under President Eisenhower's administration, the federal government actually decided to form a treaty with the alien entities, which I don't even know, how does that even happen? Do they come down and knock on the door and you shake hands and you're like, hey, let's sign this piece of paper. Let's sign this very thin shaving of a tree and make a deal. I don't know how that works, but nevertheless, allegedly, the government signed a treaty with these alien entities. Now, stay with me for all of y'all that want to just close off the video right now and be like, okay, this is BS. Stay to the end, okay? Phil actually said that this treaty was named the Greada Treaty, which basically made the agreement that the aliens involved could take cows and test their implanting techniques on a few human beings as well. But they had to provide all the details that they collected from these cows and from these humans that they tested on back to the government. Now, according to Phil, the aliens eventually ignored the deal altogether, went rogue, did whatever they wanted to do, probably when they realized how less advanced we are if all of this happened, right? They're probably like, bump that treaty. But nevertheless, they completely did whatever that they wanted to do. And this is what he said led to the Dulce attack in 1979 that gave him his injuries. Phil says he was involved in building an addition to the deep underground military base at Dulce, which he said was probably the deepest base at 7 levels that goes down to about 2.5 miles deep. Now, when you're first looking at Dulce in New Mexico, it looks like this, just like a small southwestern town. I mean, just a few years ago, they did not even have a traffic light. I don't know if they have one now, but they didn't a few years ago. However, the rumors about Dulce, New Mexico are really, really far out there. I mean, I was so down the rabbit holes. The rumors about this small town is that on the surface, there's not a lot to see, but underneath the surface, there are unimaginable experiments and technologies that are going on beneath. And according to the rumors about this town, way back in the 1930s is when it came out, or people started talking about there being this secret underground base there. We're talking almost 100 years ago, guys. So a very, very, very long time ago is when these whispers started. Now, when Phil was telling his story, he would go on to say that they had to drill like 4 distinct holes in the desert, and they were going to link these holes together and blow out large sections at a time. Phil would say that his job was to go down in the holes and to check the rock samples. Phil was actually known to be an explosive expert. He was able to look at the rock and tell how porous it was and what kind of explosive would be best. And so that's what he was hired to do. Phil said on this particular day, he was headed down there and that he found himself in like this large cavern that was full of outer space aliens, or otherwise known as these like large grays.
In this process, I was lowered down the basket of one of these holes, and about from me to this elderly woman here in the front was sitting a 7-foot tall alien gray. The stench was worse than the worst garbage can you can imagine. The person was or the entity was absolutely horrible. I killed 2 of them. Yes, they're mortal and they do die. However, in the process, one of them did this. All I remember is that he just kind of waved his hand in front of his chest, and the next thing I know, this blue beam hit me and just literally opened me up like a fish, and burnt my fingers right off of me. And it was some form of electrical force, because the kind of like being hit by a lightning bolt burned all my toenails off of me much. And there was a Green Beret that was right behind me that risked his life. In fact, he died. But he risked his life. He shoved me back in the basket and hit the button and took me up. And I wouldn't be alive talking to you today if it wasn't for him. I'm forever indebted. He lost his life. 66 Secret Service agents, Green Berets, Black Berets, crack troops lost their lives because the government, our United States government, lied, did not tell us anything about the alien threat.
Phil would go on to say that after this incident, that a bunch more came down. There was a lot of people ended up being injured. As a matter of fact, I heard different interviews of people that live in that town from years ago who said that 70-something people came out of there dead, like humans, like from whatever was going on down there, and that they weren't allowed to talk about it. Like, these are all rumors, obviously, but these are the things that were being said. Then Phil would go on to say that before this, he did not realize what all was down there until he ran into these beings and he had this incident. He said afterwards, this is when he realized or learned that aliens were not only here on the earth, but that they have been here for millions of years. Phil also said that because he was shot with cobalt radiation, that is what he ended up getting cancer from later. Now, critics say that none of this ever happened, and that, as a matter of fact, Phil had very serious mental issues. He was even diagnosed with schizophrenia, and he was even put into a mental institution from 1968 to 1969 to be treated for it. They say that under stress, Phil would actually mutilate himself. And they even said, y'all, that he amputated his 2 fingers and his thumbs by himself. Now, come on. The first part of it, maybe you're bringing me in to think, okay, well, maybe he's, seeing things that aren't there, but you're going to tell me that he cut himself up from the neck to the bottom to the over, just chopped his... Okay, let's keep going here because we're going to talk about what his wife had to say and everything. So anyways, after this attack, Phil says that he ended up spending 2 years recuperating from his injuries, which, yeah, did you guys see his chest? It looked terrible. He also went on to work for government contractors, where his interest in UFOs really began to grow after that, which I can imagine. He said he even spent some time working at Area 51 at one point. But then in 1994, Phil started giving lectures about government cover-ups, black projects, and UFOs. According to Phil's now ex-wife, Cynthia, she believes that Phil started lecturing because of the death of his very good friend, Ron Rummel. The police actually ruled his death as a ending of it all by putting a firearm in his mouth. However, in the police report, it is noted that there is blowback blood on Ron's hand, but not on the actual firearm. Because of this, Phil got really suspicious because Phil and Ron had been working on a magazine project called Alien Digest together. The magazine had recently become super popular and was getting talked about a lot. So Phil believed that because of this magazine that they're putting out everything that they're saying as facts and experiences and knowledge. Phil believed that that is why his friend Ron was ended by somebody else, but however ruled an ending of it all, if you guys know what I'm saying here. And Phil also believed that the reason why Ron was taken out was so he would not expose any more government cover-ups. So Cynthia said that Phil felt like it was time to spread the word more than ever and started giving lectures. In one of Phil's lectures from May of 1995, Phil claimed that his father was involved in the infamous Philadelphia experiment. Now, if you guys have never heard about this, whoa, okay. Whoa. Now, according to Wikipedia, the Philadelphia experiment was a situation that happened back in 1943. Now, this man named Carl that was a part of the military and a part of the United States Navy came out and basically said that this experiment that they were doing, this Philadelphia experiment, was where the U.S. Navy attempted to make a destroyer escort class ship disappear, and these bizarre results followed. Now follow me here. Now, if you guys don't know about this, you're probably thinking, what? Yes, this Philadelphia experiment was allegedly an experiment where this humongous United States Navy ship is out in the ocean, and allegedly the military is trying to make it disappear, like go invisible, in order to better, fight in wars and stuff. Now, this story first surfaced in late 1955 when this Carl sent a book full of handwritten notes referring to the experiment to a U.S. Navy research organization, and then a little later, a series of letters making further claims to a UFO book writer. According to Wikipedia, Carl's account of the event is widely understood to be like a hoax, which is pretty far out there to imagine, okay? And of course, the U.S. Navy says that no experiment like this ever happened. They were not out there in the middle of the ocean trying to make a big, giant ship disappear. However, there are a lot of believers out there that believe that this experiment really happened. And there's a lot of people believe that there was like these researchers that thought that they could use large electrical generators to bed light around an object so that the object would become invisible and hopefully undetectable on a radar. They say that the testing began in the summer of 1943 and that it was somewhat successful. One test allegedly resulted in this big ship becoming nearly invisible with like this greenish fog around it, but the crew members that were on board apparently became very, very, very nauseous after this test. But allegedly,